I remember Jonathan Vegas kind of winning his first PGA tournament, and Jonathan, it looked like he came out of nowhere. And I had somebody, one of the press guys, that asked me about it. Oh my gosh, he's such an incredible player. He said, he's an overnight success. I said, yeah, he's a 10-year overnight success. I said, I've been working with him for 10 years. Okay. And the kid's worked his tail off, and he's had it so hard, you can't even believe the challenges that this kid's had. So, understanding that, when you see something, you're seeing usually the product of at least 10 years of really hard work before you see somebody stepping on that world stage.
Welcome to the Golf Parent, where we explore the path to mastery in golf, in parenting, and in life. Today's guest is someone very special to me. He was on episode number 1 of the Golf Parent podcast, and now he's back for round 2. The one, the only, Kevin Kirk. Kevin's not just one of the most respected coaches in the game. He's been called the Golf Sherpa. And if you've ever heard him speak, you know exactly why. He's worked with multiple Masters champions and elite pros, and he's a guy that players go to when they're not just trying to fix their golf game, but when they're trying to understand themselves. In this conversation, we go deep. We talk about the journey of mastery, parenting with intention, how technology is reshaping development, and what it truly means to build a warrior culture, not just in golf, was on but in episode life. Number. If you're a parent, a coach, or just simply someone trying to help your child reach their full potential, this episode will change how you think about growth. He's not just one of the most respected coaches in the game. He's been called the Golf Sherpa. And if you've ever heard him speak, you know exactly why. He's worked with boarding schools for developing the next generation of champions. With a private golf course, elite coaches, and a 99% college placement rate. Yep, parents, I know you want to hear that. IJGA is redefining what's possible in junior golf. Learn more at ijga.com. All right, now let's get into it. Here's round 2 with the great Kevin Kirk. A 99.
Kevin Kirk is back on the podcast. Welcome back, Kevin. Welcome back.
Thanks, Ryan. It's been a minute, buddy.
It's definitely been a minute, and we're talking off air, but it's kind of full circle right now because you were episode 1 of The Golf Parent, Kevin Kirk, episode 1, and it was a great episode. And I still, to this day, the conversations that we had and everything we talked about, it still kind of resonates, like the spectrum of possibility and everything we talked about that separates the great players from the rest. And it was a jam-packed episode. It was a good one.
Yeah, I think we definitely covered some landscape last time we got together, and I'm sure we'll kind of get off into some fun stuff today. And I do appreciate you having me on, and also I was honored to be kind of the first episode that you rolled out. So thank you so much for that.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't congratulate you as well. I think it just came out that you were once again voted top 50 Golf Digest best teachers in America. Is that true?
Correct. I kept telling everybody if I hung around Ryan Addams long enough, he was going to make me famous, and I'll be damned if you didn't. So
no, I think it's the opposite, but I appreciate the lies. So
no, but thank you. Thank you for saying.
No, you're very welcome. It's well deserved. It's not just the Golf Parent audience that sees value in your wisdom and your teachings. It's obviously other teachers, and it's the golf community at large. So it's well deserved.
Thank you.
So what's going on in your world right now? What's got your attention? Where are you at right now? Kind of like towards the end of the season, the golf season. Yeah. What's your world looking like?
Yeah, it's an exciting time for me. And my son just graduated from just off step on kind of a personal matter. My son just graduated from high school, so I dropped him off at LaSalle University here recently. He's a rower, so he's going to take on rowing for as a craft for a while, which is a lot harder than golf, by the way. And so he's up at LaSalle in Philadelphia, and so I'm at a point now where just trying to kind of rethinking my next steps, looking at exploring some new things that I really stuck around here in the Woodlands, really try to kind of make sure it's obviously a lovely place, but stuck around here to make sure he got out of school, and so just having a kind of a kind of a whiteboard time in my life where I'm kind of thinking outside the box and trying to think about some new things and explore some new things. So I'm not sure where it's all going to end up, but that's kind of where I sit.
So there's going to be a lot of the audience right now that are maybe a couple years behind you right now. But are you a legitimate empty nester? Like, is that it now? The kids are out?
Yes, yeah. So we've got 4 boys, and Jay was the youngest, and so he is He's actually an incredible kid. I don't, just watching him grow up and watching him and kind of move out in the world. He's just such an incredible kid, and I feel like he's got a good set of kind of, he sees the world through a great set of filters, and has, good people skills, and I think some things that will probably serve him well over his life, and feel pretty confident that no matter what he kind of gets into, he'll be able to handle, he'll find his way, and we're going to love him and support him as much as we possibly can. But he's uh he's an amazing kid on his own in his own right, and I'm really really proud of him. So.
I was gonna say, spoken like a true proud dad, and everybody in the audience could just hear that right now, that beaming pride. So, I'm curious, what advice then, if you could step outside of your situation, what advice would you be giving to somebody that's, kind of trying to figure out what the next stage is, transitioning from, being the father and the kids and being like all focused, then career and all the rest of it, to then, like you said, to the next stages? What advice would you give yourself?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just kind of doing some introspective work, some soul searching, inside of myself to figure out kind of what the next thing is for me. And some of it is the things that I want to do, and then there's also just the calling that we have. I was called to coach it when, it was a calling for me. It wasn't like a choice I had. It was I felt like that I was, once I kind of got through all of the things I needed to kind of go through, I woke up one day and realized that my purpose on this planet was coaching. And so, having that purpose and being able to kind of reimagine that, try to figure out, and once I've kind of done with this particular phase, what does that look like? And as the world's changing and kind of, and then moving on to these next stages of my life. So just a lot of introspective work, trying to kind of sit with that and let my, try to, run through all the thoughts that go around it, let my spirit kind of guide me along. So that's really been really what the majority of this year has been about that. And I feel like I'm kind of getting a little closer to having at least some answers or some things I want to kind of go chase down. So I'm super excited about that.
So let's get right into some maybe earlier in the episode than normal, but let's get into some parenting tips, because it's not every day that we have obviously a fantastic coach, but also a dad that's raised four boys. Looking back now, and obviously every personality is different, every soul is different, every child is a little bit different. But what were some of the through lines that now you kind of look back on your parenting journey that seem to be universal truths, or something that you kind of learned, or that you would pass on to maybe parents that are earlier in the journey with young kids?
But I think for me, I kind of got into parenting kind of late in the game, which was probably probably good for the boys that I was involved with, the four boys that, there are four sons. And so, I think, I'd had enough life experience that I could actually, I mean, I think I was going to be a better parent kind of a little bit later on in my life than I was early. So, for a lot of reasons, I avoided kind of, all those types of things until pretty late. So the long story short is, I think for me, the thing that I was able to that I recognize now, and I probably knew it going in, but I know it more now, is that each one of those kids is different. I mean, they have different souls, they have different things they bring to the table, different, inherent challenges, and different, sets of kind of things that they do well. And so it's always an equals one. I don't think that there's any parenting book, for. I think it has to do with just being able to kind of be with this being that's landed in your life, and try to figure out, okay, how can I serve this person, and how can I help them move forward, and try to help prepare them for the the world. And to be fair, the world ahead's going to be challenging. I mean, with AI coming, I don't even know what that's going to look like. And I it's going to be really really tricky. I think probably for this next loop of kids that are kind of out there. And I just, I really want them to, my kids, what I really wanted them to be able to do is to be able to look at things, think outside the box, to be able to reason their way through things, and think, and be able to kind of think their way through things, and not just be able to follow the rhetoric and all the noise that happens, whether it's in coaching or whether it's in school or whether it's in life or whatever, to be able to think for themselves, and to be able to kind of make decisions based on, what where they are, and what's best for them and their family. So
How do you teach that? I mean, I'm assuming your kids went to public school. Am I right in that, or did they go to private?
Yeah, the three older boys went to public school. Jay, our younger one, had some. He was a little bit struggled with his academics for a long time, so we put him in a private school, just so we could try to protect him. To be fair, just to get, I didn't think he was going to be a the public school wasn't quite set up for him and his learning style. And to his credit, he kind of he failed and failed and failed and failed forward until he finally figured it out.
I
And
love
so,
that.
but that was also kind of, one of the things when we talked about public school for him was to say, hey, listen, we understand that Jay's, got some challenges, but at the same time, and we're okay with him failing, but just I want him to stay in school and keep failing and to keep failing forward until he can figure it out. The one thing that I've learned about kids, watching them all grow up is that kids mature at different times. They and the things the types of things that, what one person does, in terms of developmentally, what one kid can do early on, maybe another kid's going to be behind. And so giving kids a chance for their brains to develop, let them to kind of develop on their own timetable, literally out of nowhere, uh, his junior year, all of a sudden, this kid starts making great grades, and he hadn't passed a class in the first 10 years of school. So but it was him figuring it out. I asked him the other day. I said, "How'd you figure that out?" He goes, "I just finally figured it out, Dad." I said, "Okay, fair enough." So
Patience. Well, I
so you got
ask
to get
because
you
it's like how do we teach our kids how to? I'm asking this question because I'm struggling right now with trying to figure out how to educate my own son. Do I put him into traditional school? Do I homeschool him? Do I use, you know, things are changing so quickly, and I've gone down the rabbit holes, and I see how education was kind of set up to, teach workers and, raise your hand, go to the bathroom, permission, show up at a certain time, all the rest of that. And I'm trying to figure out in this new landscape, I'm like, how do we teach leaders? How do we? And I know that obviously a lot of the private schools are give that option a little bit easier. And so I'm just kind of curious. You had said with your sons that you were teaching them to be independent thinkers and critical thinkers, and not just like get caught up in the noise, and not just listen to the rhetoric, as you said. And I'm just kind of curious, like, how do we teach that? How do we teach that to our kids when they are inundated in a system and in a structure that maybe wants to put them in a box?
Mark Cuban did something, uh, he's obviously a bright guy and somebody who's been able to evolve over time and be successful, in kind of the classical sense, and has made a truckload of money. But he's also, watching and listening to him, I think he's a bright guy. And back in like 2018 or 19, he said something kind of interesting. He said he had been asked to give a commencement speech. And I think this is floating around the internet someplace, but he's been asked to give a commencement speech to some high school kids. And he says, I love doing it. I've done it, a lot. And he goes, the first 50 times I gave him basically the same speech. I said, go out and upskill yourself on coding and mathematics and engineering and medicine. These things aren't going to be, not going to have to worry about, over time those things are going to hold together. He says, for the very first time, I told a group of kids something different. And he says, I told them that, when you go to school to head off to college, he goes, you need to go to study um, um, liberal arts. So go study philosophy. Go study, you know, history. Because he goes, because going forward, all the things that have been done previously are going to be done by AI. So, you know, so all the computer programs are going to write themselves. The engineering is going to be done off AI. The medicine is probably going to be done off AI. All this is heading to a place where you're not going to. All that stuff those aren't going to be skills that human beings do. But so what you're gonna have to do is you're gonna have to be able to think your way through things, look at situations, look at data, try to figure out what this, where trends are going. And you have to be, if you're gonna go be successful going forward, you got to be able to think. So they said for the first time ever, I'm encouraging kids to kind of go to school and learn these logic and reasoning skills. That those are more important than probably some of the other things that we've historically kind of hung our hat on. So.
And that is great advice. And I mean, if that commencement speech was given in 2018 or 19, I mean, how true it is. And I don't think anybody saw the fact that all the white collar jobs, lawyers and doctors and engineers, and these are the ones that are very easily kind of augmented or even eventually replace. So yeah, it's a weird time to be
Right.
raising a kid for sure. But that kind of
Yeah.
leads us back to golf, which is one of the reasons why for my own son I'm giving him the gift of golf, which is like it gets him outside, it gets him, interacting with, three other people, it gets him to be away from his phone, away from any sort of technology, hopefully for that time being. How are you seeing things? How are you seeing kind of technology not only changing the game, but like is it almost like what was it, Rocky 2 or Rocky 3, where it was like Dolph Lundgren with all the technology, all the injections, all the latest science, and then Rocky goes to the cabin and he's running through snow and chopping wood and he's going old school. And is it that case? Like is it one of those things where those kids that have all the technology at their fingertips will have an advantage, or will they'll be those kids that are digging it out of the dirt without the technology per se are the ones that are going to learn the grit and the skills that they need? Like, what's your take on that?
Well, I mean, I think just that, technology just gives us a bigger toolkit. And so the question is how do you use or apply the technology that's available? And unfortunately, there's a lot of people that are hung up in the idea that the technology is the answer. And the truth of the matter is, we're dealing with human beings. And these human beings, mastery is mastery, and there's nothing that you can. I don't see anything that we've done in terms of technology that's shortened this mastery curve. The mastery, learning to master something, still it involves work, having to kind of work at something, and you can't press a button, you can't, I do think that technology might give us some more. There's less room for probably interpretation, or I mean, so there's yeah, it makes it easier to make some decisions to some extent. However, there's also so much information that it can the weight of all that information can start becoming so heavy that it can become very, very confusing. So going back to kind of our conversation earlier, the ability to think your way through things and figure out, okay, out of all this information, what's relevant, right? And how can I, there's some things that are going to move the needle and some things aren't. And it's the things that are going to move the needle. I don't think change much. I still think to be able to master something, it still requires work. It requires deliberate practice. It requires effort. It requires intention. It requires, purpose. It requires culture. I mean, and at the end of the day, those things are going to be the things that we have to start reminding ourselves that are the really the guts and the nuts and the bolts of mastery is to being able to to go out and do those things consistently. And so, but they, in all the noise that's around them, it's easy to kind of wash out and kind of forget that that's really kind of what it's all about.
Okay, I would love to read the Kevin Kirk book on mastery, but let's simplify it for everybody. If you were to write that book right now and you were to break it into three sections, three of the most important sections, what would be those sections from your point of view of like what is mastery? Like what are the key components of it? What would be the sections in that book, and how would you organize it?
Well, I mean, I think there's like all things, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. Right. So what does the beginning mean? What's the beginning look like? Because the things that are important in the beginning may not be important in the middle of the end. So a lot of it has to do with, that as a person kind of moves down that timeline. And let's just say that the mastery models that have been presented, are accurate. I mean, we can argue that, okay, is it 10,000 hours? Is it 7,000 hours? But we know there's going to be some time that's involved in being able to kind of master a skill. So, or become a master of anything, whether it's business, music, art, sport, whatever it is. Um, so, the first part of that is making, would be trying to kind of make sure that, as you onboard onto the sport, that you bring in, you get the right tools to the table. So for youth, physical literacy is super important. You got to get, so the more activities they can do, the better. If you look because that gives them the courage and to take on sport and to not to feel like they're okay going to the golf course and they're they failed enough at other activities before that that they're not going to be run off by the kind of the failure that we have in golf. So, and in the middle, obviously being able to kind of figure out, okay, what's what is starting to kind of look down the road a bit and say, okay, where am I trying to go with this? Because the middle of that road is going to be dictated almost exclusively by where I'm trying to go, with the intention for the long term. Right? Do I want to play? Am I pretty content being a recreational player? Am I a top golf guy? Am I a gamer where my golf is online? And so it doesn't really matter how you consume golf. That's your relationship with golf, and so, but what's the intent going forward? Am I happy with this, or do I want to try to figure out what that next step takes like looks like? So understanding that there's a pathway of development in terms of going from A to B to C, kind of down that pathway, and then the last part of it is being okay. Once I kind of arrive at this destination that I've kind of set for myself, how can I sustain it? How can I maintain it? And then, how long do I want to try to kind of, do this, right? Because at some point in time, particularly with competitive golf, at some point in time, there's an end point to it. It doesn't go on forever. I mean, there was a bunch of guys, that, at some point we cycle out. And so there's this pathway. The great thing about golf is a game. You can play it from, till your last breath, if that's what you decide to choose. Um, and I think Mark Bull is a very good friend of mine. I think he's very, very bright, and he always reminds me, and I remind myself of this every day, is it's always n equals one, right? It's always a population of one. There's no formula, there's no recipe for any of this stuff. It's trying to kind of make sure that as you start, you take enough time to understand what the specific individual, who they are, right? And what it is that they're trying to accomplish, and then you can kind of start figuring out what the roadmap looks like from there. So Istvan Bali was a very good friend of mine. I'm sorry, Istvan Bali was a very good friend of mine. Istvan used to tell me, he said, if you want to teach Johnny or Jane golf, you got to understand golf, and you got to understand Johnny or Jane. And so starting with this understanding that, you know, I've been in golf long enough that I feel like I understand it. I feel like I have a really good understanding of what golf is, from a skill perspective, from a practice perspective, and depending on how you want to play the game and how you want to consume it, we can customize something for you. But if I roll into this and I'm trying to superimpose all these ideas onto Johnny or Jane, and I don't know them, it's the chances of it landing are maybe 25 or 30%. I've got to make sure I understand the Johnny or Jane well enough so I can help
The
them.
psychology. Yeah, it makes sense. I want to go back to so n equals one. What do you mean by that? Is it at the end? Is it first
So
principle thinking? Or is
it's
it
always a
just
population.
of
It's always a population of one. So you have 10 kids come into a junior clinic. It's not the N is not 10, N is one. Okay. Each one of those kids is an individual. So you cannot, it doesn't really matter. So, I mean, you can have some group training sessions together and then they can train together, but each one of those kids is on their own path. They're not on a collective path. It's not like we're, kind of a team. Each one of those kids is actually on their own developmental path. And so they have different there are different, different points of development. They're different kind of skill levels. They're kind of, even though they might be in a kind of they've been bunched together. The truth of the matter is they're all very individual. And so, when I start with when I got into my coaching, one of the things that I did was kind of funny is I went from this kind of it was almost like um, an intuitive kind of approach, and I started kind of getting myself further down the road and seeing more people, and I started thinking, well, I've got to get myself a little more organized. So I went to work on trying to put together some sort of form that I could use to try to assess quickly. And it was a disaster. It was an absolute disaster. And it was a disaster because it just, in context of having a conversation with somebody says something that might divert me or make me think that I have to maybe kind of shift gears a little bit. So to this day, so after a year or so of that, I just drove myself crazy. I said, I can't do that. I've got to have to rethink this. So when I sit down with somebody for the very first time, blank piece of paper every time. Okay, there's no forms to fill out. I'm going to start with a blank piece of paper, and I'm going to say, all right, you know, tell me your golf story. I want to hear where you've been before I even make any comments about where we're going to try to go from here. So if they can give you some backstory on where they've been, it makes it pretty easy to start figuring out, okay, well, what's the next set of questions going to look like? And it's always different, you know? And but giving people that room to kind of start with them, is who is Johnny or Jane, right? And then they've come to me to try to help with their golf. Well, I've got to figure out who you are before I can kind of figure out how to help you.
have you found certain personalities or the who you are's in common for let's get rid of the recreational golfer for a second, or somebody that's, the gamer, but someone that's actually coming to you to take to the very, very highest levels of golf. What sort of commonalities, if any, have you seen in those who you are type answers that they get?
But I think that, there's they 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 come in a lot of different forms, right? And some of the things that, when we start trying to look at, what skill sets people bring to the table, some of it is nature, some of it's nurture, some of it is just, kind of inherently wired into their brain. And some kids are really good at some things, and some kids are going to have, have other things that they're good at. So for me, the one thing that I know of for certain, there's a couple of things that I see with these really people that have really achieved a lot of really significant things in the game of golf. I mean, we're talking about top 10 world class players, and I've had the good fortune to be around a few of them. Um, so number one is there's hyper intentional. They don't land on those spaces by accident. Okay. So it's very, very intentional about, what it is they're trying to do. So where that intention is set up by the player themselves, or, it's a coach or a combination of those things. But reg- all things aside, they're hyper intentional, right? So I want to be a top 10 player in the world. I mean, that's stated very early on. It's not like, well, so, this idea of I'm going to try to be the best I can be, it's too soft. It doesn't land well when you're trying to kind of land it at a very specific, location. And the reason that is because, it, to- that what's the second part of it is, so I'll kind of keep going down this track, is there's once you can figure out what the intention is, there's very specific benchmarks relative to performance. Right? We know exactly if somebody wants to be a top 10 player in the world, we know specifically that's super easy to find. Okay, how good do you have to be off the tee? How good do you have to be on approach? How good do you have to be around the greens? Good do you have to be on the greens? We can find those. We can numerically find that. There's enough data today in today's world where you can benchmark that. Right? Then the third thing is the training. Okay, how are you going to train that? How do you build the training to be able to support it? And the last part is going to be the culture that you bring. Can you bring a warrior culture that's strong enough to be able to handle the failures and all the difficulties and the challenges that the game is going to, that this pathway is going to present for you? So, you bring looking at that as kind of let's say a template: intention, benchmarks, training, culture. Right? The ones that have been able to be able to kind of push themselves to those places have, they clearly can kind of have the physical and technical ability to do it. So they've got they're able, let's say, right. They're super intentional, and the last thing is they've had enough. They've had this. Most of them have had some significant failure at some point in time in their life that they've had to go through that allows them to do things that other kids won't do. They I can survive this. Okay. I don't care how bad it is. I can survive it because I've survived X, whatever X was. Right. So I think that, um, the problem that we have in, it's yeah, sport and in general is always best played by blue collar kids, unfortunately, because
I was going to say
they've
that
had
it
to
was one
grow
of
up
your
a little bit.
iconic quotes of the first episode was golf is a white collar sport best played by blue collar kids. And I remember you saying that. I was like, ooh,
Correct.
that's
That's
good.
exactly right. So the kids that have kind of come through, that I've been fortunate enough to kind of watch, kind of, ascend to these world class levels. They've all had significant challenges. They're all blue collar kids, um, and they've been able to kind of, get themselves organized within kind of some sort of system that allowed them to stay on that mastery path long enough to achieve what they wanted to achieve. So. Um, I remember Jonathan Vegas, winning his first PGA tournament, and Jonathan kind of looked like he came out of nowhere. And I had one of the press guys that asked me about it. Oh my gosh, these kids, he's such an incredible player. He said he's an overnight success. I said, yeah, he's a 10-year overnight success. I said I've been working with him for 10 years. Okay, and the kid's worked his tail off, and he's had it so hard you can't even believe the challenges that this kid's had. So understanding that when you see something, you're seeing usually the product of at least 10 years of really hard work before you see somebody stepping on that world stage. And so the question is are the kid does the person that's kind of come to you, do they have the fortitude and the wherewithal to stay on the path long enough to and work on the right things with the idea that it might not work out. This I may do this, and this may not turn out like I want to, but I'm going to do it anyway because I think because I know that it's going to require this amount of work.
I'm going to add something here that I just actually heard today, right before this call. And so it's rather fresh in my mind, but it was one of the most descriptive and accurate kind of analogies or visualizations for success. We've all heard success is like an iceberg, right? You see the tip, but you don't see everything that's behind it and all that. Exactly the 10-year overnight success. But the way it was described was is that imagine you have a river and a field next to the river, and you're basically digging an irrigation ditch. And you're sitting there, and every day you're digging this irrigation ditch towards the river. And all that effort, you're seeing nothing until you get to that very last little section, that last 1%, and all of a sudden you break the dirt right next to the river, and all of that success and energy, everything you want just floods into the river, and the last 1% of your effort basically gave you 100% of all of the quote unquote reward, but
Correct. Yeah.
99% of the effort, got you nothing, but yet you still had to do it to get to that last 1%, which does bring the water in. And I thought it was just a beautiful way to kind of describe
Yeah.
the process of success.
Yeah. No, I think I mean, that describes it beautifully. I mean, and the problem is that you may dig the ditch, and and you might get there, and the river might dry up.
Yeah, you're going,
But
or
you
you're
have
going
to
the
you have
wrong
to
way.
but you have to have you have to start with like I said, some intention that this is what I'm going to intend to do, right? And I know that if I get rid of a foot of this stuff every day, over the course of however many feet I've got to kind of get to, right? Uh, then I'm gonna there's a chance that I'm gonna get what I want.
You had said something as part of your kind of breakdown, and the last one was culture, but you also said warrior. So I'm kind of curious, how do you define a golf warrior? Because I love that idea that there's a golf warrior out there. But what does a golf warrior look like, or like what goes into becoming a golf warrior? Hey, if you're enjoying The Golf Parent, if these conversations have inspired you or helped you become a better parent to your junior golfer, please hit subscribe. It truly means the world to us and sends a powerful signal that what we're doing matters. And if you're feeling extra generous, leave us a review or follow us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. Your support helps us grow and continue bringing you incredible guests each week. Thank you. And now back to the episode.
Yeah, I mean, I think you start kind of looking at um, you start kind of looking at sport in kind of a metaphorical perspective. Sport is like going to war. You're having to go in and you're going to battle against everybody else that you're competing against. Um, and so to be good at it, you have to have the mental toughness and the mental wherewithal to be able to kind of do that. And I'll tell you a fun story about that. I worked with a girl named Maria Berchanova, and Maria was an Olympian. I mean, sorry, she was from Russia, and she was probably 250th in the world playing on the LAT. And I got a call from her coach in Europe and said, "Hey, listen, she wants to come to the States and she wants to start kind of playing over there. And I, would you be interested in helping her out?" So yeah, of course. So she came over, we got started, and she was, making great progress. And this is the time that the Olympics were rolling around. So this is 2016, 15. So she gets tapped to go to the Olympics. So she's super excited about it. And so about 8 weeks before the Olympics, she rolls into my office, and I can tell that something is not right. This woman is normally just super on point. But I could tell there's something really that she's really struggling with. So we go on the practice tee, and she's short with herself, and kind of carrying on. I said, "Let's go sit down in the office, and let's go have a chat." So I sat down and I said, "Maria," I said, I may be fishing here. And if I'm overstepping boundaries, please let me know. But it seems like something's off. What's going on?" And she goes, "This the Olympics thing, you know. I've been to the Olympics." I said, "I know. I'm so excited for you." She goes, "Well, it's easy for you to say that." She goes, "The Olympics in Russia is a huge thing." And she goes, "I've had friends of mine that have made their Olympic teams and gone on and had good performances in the Olympics, and um, they come back and the whole entire world opens up to them. Their families are taken care of. There's opportunities also." She goes, "But I've also had friends that have gone to the Olympics and haven't not gone well, come back, and it's exactly the opposite, where, ostracized families, And she goes, "I'm scared to death that I'm gonna go bomb at the Olympics and it's gonna affect me and my family." I'm like, that's a proper concern, right?
That's a real issue.
So so I said, "Well, let's do this." I said, "There's no reason to think that, based on kind of the way you've been, that you way you've been playing, that things are gonna things are gonna unless something happens where you kind of go and just you kind of get in your own way. This good play should continue." So I said, "So let's do this." Um, I said, let's have a think about how we're gonna try to help you develop a warrior culture, so that when you get there, your and culture is really kind of it's trying to create, it's like how we do how we do things here. So if you run in with Maria, this is how it's going to be. And the warrior culture is about, when you go compete, how do you need to be? What are the qualities that you need to bring to those moments that are going to allow you to get the best out of yourself? Right? What are the qualities that you have to bring? Don't worry about it. You've got the training, you got the physical stuff, but what are the mental qualities that you're gonna have to bring to those moments to make sure that you've got the best opportunity for this outcome that you want. So um so anyway, we sat down, we started kind of talking about it. So let's come up with 5 qualities that you feel like that you're gonna need. She goes, I've got to be fearless. I cannot go in there and be afraid of this." I said, "I agree. So fearless. Okay." I said, "What else?" She goes, "Well, I have to be focused. Okay. When I get in there, sometimes my focus wanders. When I'm there, I need to be really focused." Right? All right. What else? She goes, "I need to be, um, uh, I need to be decisive. So sometimes I get in those moments and I can't decide. I can't make a decision. So anyway, we go through 4 or 5 of these things, so by the end of it, she's come up with 5 qualities that she feels like she needs to kind of bring to this, take with her to give herself the best chance to succeed. So I said, "Okay, that's step one. And step two is I need to get a picture of you, or an archetype of you in your power pose. So some picture of you that you feel like this represents me when I am at my biggest my most warrior like, pose." And so she found a picture of herself from the LAT, with her hands on her hips and looking at her sunglasses. She goes, "This is me when I'm on." I said, "Okay." So we got some cards made up, and we had on one side we had the pictures, on the other side we had the words. I said, "Okay, this goes in your yardage book. Your cat has got one, I got one. Anybody that comes in contact with you and you run up for this Olympics, this is you. You tell them this is who I am. This is how I roll. And when you're around me, this is what I need from you. I need all of us to kind of be pulling the same rope. I need to so. And if anybody's off, you're free to call anybody out to say, 'Hey, listen, this is our culture.'" So anyway, so long story short is we practice, she gets geared up, and she goes over for the Olympics. And this is in Rio. So she gets to the Olympics, first couple rounds, 2 or 3 rounds, she plays decent. She's kind of in the middle of the pack. We're sitting around even par. The last day she goes out and she's 10 under par. 60,
Whoa.
62, I believe was the round. And she set the course record for the event, and the Olympic record for one day score, and for both the men and the women for the Olympics. So she comes back, and Maria's probably 35 at this time. So she's got a young daughter. So she comes back, and I call her. We get on the phone. Gosh, I'm so happy for her. She barely misses a medal by like 1 or 2 strokes. But anyway, she's had this. She leaves the Olympics being the the world record holder for score in the Olympics. So she gets back to Russia, and I don't hear from her for 3 or 4 weeks, and so finally I pick up the phone and I call her. She said, I'll see you in 6 weeks coming back to the States, and we'll get ready for tour school," whatever it was we were getting ready for. So I call her about 3 or 4 weeks later. I said, "Maria, just gonna call, check in, see how you're doing." She goes, "I've been meaning to call you." I said, "Oh, good." She goes, "Remember that story I told you about how well things go if you become you have a good experience at the Olympics?" So yeah. She goes, "Well, I was the world record holder for score in the Olympics," and I said, "Yeah, yeah, I know." She goes, "Well, I came back, and a week later, on my desk in my office, in my- I've got about $4 or $5 million worth of contracts that have been dropped on me in terms of clothing and different all these different people wanting to do business with me because I've had this experience in the Olympics." She goes, "I've done the math." She goes, "I'm 35 years old. I don't think I'm going to be able to make that much money playing golf. So I think I'm going to retire and try to take advantage of these opportunities." And so,
Fantastic, though.
you know, f- and I said, "I am so happy for you." Right. But the cool thing about that story was that, um, she sat down, she brought this to the table. She came up with a solution, and she went out, and she had the guts and the ability to kind of go out there when it really mattered most, and have these qualities that she was kind of bring that allowed her to become the best warrior she could be. And so it is warrior culture. There's you know um, there's I can give you some references on some people that have done some great work in that area, but I do think that when you sit down with particularly competitive golfers, part of the discussion needs to be, okay, what are the qualities that you're going to bring to those moments when it really matters, when you're training, when things are going good, when things are going bad, like whether it's going to be a big international competition or a national event or going to be your club championship or whatever it is that you have attached value to. Being able to kind of bring that culture to those moments is just super important. So
I think now, after having a couple conversations with you, I think that the theme is hyper intentionality. I've heard you say it a few times, and it certainly seems like that is that golden nugget that separates so many, like the best from the rest, is that they're hyper intentional with the way that they think, the way that they're creating a persona, the way that they're practicing, the way that they're even dreaming. It seems to be something magical happens when you crystallize that down and you actually get clear with what you want. Would you say that that's a fair assessment?
yeah, I think intention is the top of the chain there. I mean, it sets off everything else follows intention. Behavior follows intention, planning follows intention, performance follows intention. But so being non-intentional or non-committal relative to your intention and it's funny because no matter what you decide, you set your intention. All right. So I have kids coming in my office all the time say, "I want to play on tour." So I'm not interested in coaching you. Like, because the guy that wants to be on tour is on the tour one year, off the tour the next year, on the tour, off the tour, on the tour, off the tour. That's purgatory. Nobody, I wish that on nobody. I've seen people live their lives that way. It's just awful. So if you I want you to no so that usually the first piece of homework I'll say is I want you to I want you to go home, and I want you to look at whatever kind of a ranking list you want to, whether it's your the FedEx list, whether it's the world ranking list, whether it's the LPGA list. What you've picked the list, but I want you to look on that list and tell me who you think you are, because until you can tell me that, I can't help you. All right. So, and usually it'll come back and say, and because the things I'm going to tell somebody that, who's trying to be top 10 in the world is different than the hundredth in the world. All right. They're both, those are both, I mean, there's a lot, if you're hundredth in the world playing golf, you're going to, on the men's side, you're going to do quite well. I mean, you're going to make yourself a truckload of money. Right. So, so I think that, but the, but that's a different conversation of hundredth in the world versus 10th in the world, because there's different metrics and there's different things that you're gonna have to dig out of yourself to kind of be able to kind of do that. So let's
Like
start
what?
with you kind of telling me where we're headed. You telling me where we're going before I get in there and start trying to steal your ship or try to ask you to do something that you're not really up for.
What is it that, I mean, people that are going from the top 100th in the world versus the top 10th? You said that there's things that you need to dig out of yourself, to get there. what is that? Is it sacrifice? Is it well, just what is it?
Well, I mean, there's different metrics. Let's start with metrics. There's the metrics for 100th in the world would be different than 10th in the world, right? So you start with that. So second thing is um, for most people to be able to kind of get there, it's going to require work. Some people, you know, some of the guys and gals that kind of get up in that area, they're comfortable with kind of their lot in life. They're pretty happy being able to kind of walk around and chase the tour around and make enough money to kind of feed their families, and that's for them, that's great. But there are people that really want to try to kind of push it up there into those, to be the best in the world. Tiger Woods at 14 years old had all Jack Nicklaus's records on his wall, looked at them every day, right? Hyper intentional. I'm gonna go break this guy's records. I don't know what else gonna happen, but these records are going down. Okay, so I mean, so that's and so for Tiger, when he was in the middle of all that, winning one major is not a big deal because I've got to get to 18, right? And so if I win a major, just shelf it, let's go grab another one, right? But if somebody said has a had, say, I just want to win one major, then all of a sudden that's a different activity, because it just seems like it's bigger than from a scaling perspective, it's way bigger than Tiger who's trying to win 18 majors, right? So the intention really kind of becomes, is really what sets up all everything that kind of follows that, all of it.
If you can answer this question, but like, why do so many of us play small in life? Like, I'm sure when you ask that question to a lot of your students, I mean, maybe they're saying on a superficial level or thinking that that's what you want to hear, that they say they want to be the best player in the world, but do they actually believe it? Do they say that? I mean, do you find that most people that come to you are saying they want to be the best of the best, or are playing small compared to what is actually inside of them?
Well, I think that, I think there's overachievers and underachievers. I think if you kind of start looking at sports as people that seem to get more out of themselves. You see somebody like a Zach Johnson, you think probably or let's say even Luke Donald. Okay, Luke Donald got to number one in the world, and he's not doesn't do anything that would just makes you stop in your tracks and go, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe how far he hits it or how good he does X, Y, or Z." Right. So he had to overachieve to get to number one in the world, and there's other players that like Dustin Johnson that could get to number one in the world at probably 80% of his capacity. Right. So there's people that that along the entire spectrum. And I love overachievement, by the way. I'm fascinated by it. I think it's the most interesting thing ever. Is how do you get more out of yourself than it looks like it's possible? And I do believe intention is what drives that. Um, so looking at trying to kind of understand that from a competitive perspective, I do think that um, there are people that say it but don't mean it. I had a tour player that I was coaching at one point in time, and when he was leaving college, I said, "What do you want to do?" He says, "I want to be the best player in the world," and this kid had the capacity to do it. So we worked and worked and got him out there on the tour, and he won a tournament and kind of got himself about 30 or 40th in the world, and then kind of tapered off and kind of started kind of going backwards. And by the end of the year, he was at 60th in the world, and so we're at this kind of year-end team meeting. And he's got all his physio and got his, his strength coaches there, and sponsors, and we're all in the room. They're all going around talking about how proud they were of him, and so it's my turn to talk, and I say, okay. I said, Jonathan, I would agree with everything's been said so far. I mean, it's been a phenomenal year, and really, really super excited for you. I said, but I do have a question for you. I said, when you and I were first started this adventure, we you told me you want to be the number one player in the world. And I said, is that still true? He goes, yeah. And I said, okay. I said, well, I will tell you this. I will tell you that your actions probably in the first probably last year and probably the first quarter of this year looked like that to me. But since then, I would say your actions don't reflect that. And I'm going to ask you again right here in front of all these people, is that what you want? Okay. Because if it is, then I'm going to call you out. because you're not. There's some things that need to happen for you to kind of get back to that. If you're not, you need to let me and everybody else in this room know so that we can adjust our expectations, right? Because if you're telling me you want to be number one in the world, us sitting around here patting you on the back about all this great stuff, and I'm not, I'm not saying that you know, there are some incredible things that have happened, but your foot is not on the gas. You're not pushing towards this number being number one in the world. And I think it was, he kind of snapped back and said something kind of silly. So I just want you to think about it, okay? And you can snap back if you need to, and if you think that's an offensive comment. But to be fair, I said, if you're going to get there, you need people to be able to kind of lean in and remind you that that's what you said, right? I'm not asking you, and if you change your mind, that's okay too. I'm okay. You just need to let me know what it is that you want to do. And it turns out the kid's pretty. He's pretty happy at 50th or 75th in the world. He's super content, doesn't really want to be much better than that. So there's one thing to say it, and then the other thing is to kind of go out there and actually try to do it and live it. Because being number one in the world is really hard, right? Being top 10 in the world it's a lot of work, a lot of sacrifice, a lot of right. Being 100th in the world is still hard, but it's not as hard as 10th in the
It's
world.
easier than number one. I heard recently that we all need three friends in our life. We need somebody that can tell us like a truth sayer. So somebody that tells us the truth, no matter how painful, holds us to account, like it sounded like you did. We need somebody that can be our confidant, that we can share our biggest secrets with, and we know it's a vault that they'll advise us and share those secrets. And then the third is a ride or die. So somebody that you could call up at 3 a.m. and say, "Hey, I need you," and they say, "Okay, where? I'll be there." I'm curious with the player that you're talking about here. Did he keep you on, or was that truth a little bit? Yeah, so he wanted the truth, but then he realized that what you were asking him, if he's being truthful with himself, he was okay with being just a player
Yeah,
instead of
he
the
circled
best.
back. He circled back with me after a while. It was a while. I mean, this all happened kind of at the end of the year, our year end meeting, and so we were talking, kind of trying to get ready. So he had some time off, and about 60 days later, he came back to me and he said, "Hey, listen," he goes, that meeting we had." I said, "Yeah." He said, "You remember that question you had about being number one in the world?" I said, "Yep." Said I was, it really kind of it really kind of upset me a little bit at first when you asked me that, because I felt like I'd worked hard to kind of accomplish some things, and it goes, and what I thought back about is you had indeed kind of told me that you were proud of that, but that second question kind of knocked me back. I wasn't, it was like I was expecting everybody to kind of tell me, all this feel good stuff, and he goes, "To be fair, Kevin," he goes, "I don't want to be number one in the world." I said, "Well, okay." I said, "Well, let's talk about that." He goes, "Probably 50th in the world kind of keeps me in, if I'm in the top 50, I get to go to all the majors. I said, "So, probably 40th in the world's probably realistic for me." It's okay. And so that's what we did. And he's
And
done
did
that.
he hover around that number?
Yep. Yeah. So because it's like once we kind of got an idea kind of where he wanted to be, we could, there's a certain, the, there's certain amount of work that kind of goes with that, and we were able to regulate that, and with his let's say whether it's his the benchmarks we had for him, or the amount of workloads, or kind of how hard to push him and not push him, and the things that you tell people along the pathway that that like I said, are dependent 100% on where they're trying to go. So, one of the things I would say that is probably from a coaching perspective, that's probably around this intentional thing, is the intent has to be set by the player. It can't be set by the parent, can't be set by the coach. And so, unfortunately, some of these kids they've been conditioned, to try to say the right answer, and sometimes it takes a while to actually get to their truth, whatever that is. And so some of the kids, have the capacity. They have a knowing inside themselves about, what their truth is, and others of them, it's under layers and layers and layers of things that they've been, that they think that they should say, or they've been told to say.
A lot of respect for the self-awareness of the player that you're talking about, to be that honest, to be like, no, actually, this is where I'm at, and this is what I truly believe and want. I mean, like that's a beautiful thing, that level of self awareness, because it's tough because you're forced to have to face a man in the mirror a little bit and be like, wait a second, what do I actually want? And it's I find that when there's a schism or like the distance between who you actually are and who you say you are, or who you think you are, but who your actions are, who you actually are, and the wider that gap is, the more, I guess, ego, insecurity, just the more of the ickiness of a personality or
Yeah,
life
yeah.
is found in there. The more you can be in alignment and congruent, yeah, it's powerful.
I agree, and like I said, unfortunately, the kids have been conditioned through positive, trying to kind of be too positive, parents trying to and coaches maybe trying to kind of get influence in terms of to tell them where they should be and what they should be doing. But ultimately, the only person that truly knows what that is the athlete themselves. And so it's being able to give them, first off, some space and permission to explore that, outside of kind of what they've been told. Okay, what do you really want to do? Right? What is it that we're really trying to do here? Because my job as a coach is simply get you where you want to go. I don't have to tell you, I'm not trying to create every player in the world be number one in the world. I'm trying to get you to where you want to go, but you need to be honest with me about where that is.
Hmm. I have a sneaky suspicion after this conversation, you might be asking yourself those same questions based on what we talked about at the beginning of the conversation. To be this
No,
interesting, fork in the road for yourself in your own career.
no doubt. I mean, those are the questions that I kind of ponder myself internally, and the great thing about it is having had, some coaching experience, that I have awareness around that, as you mentioned. And so those are the things that I kind of roll over and, what is my intention? What do I really want to do? Okay. Not what should I be doing, but what I really, what really kind of lights up my soul.
I love that. I'm curious, Kevin. So I told you I'm in Sri Lanka right now, which is where there's no studio background, and I brought two books because I brought a bunch of a lot of other stuff. So Bob Rotella, Golf is Not a Game of Perfect, and Pocket Taoism, Wisdom. I'm curious, with all of the players and everybody that you've worked with, what book or books have you gifted or have you suggested that your students read, and why?
Yeah, I think one of the things there's a couple of them that I think have been quite good. Earlier, we talked about culture, right? And we talked about the stuff that I've learned about culture relative to performance came from a guy named Jerry Lynch. And Jerry wrote a book called Way of Champions. And he's kind of a background guy for that he's probably in his 70s now, but last count I'd heard he'd had 37 or 38 world and national championship rings from different organizations he's worked with. And he does kind of almost like industrial psychology for teams, right? And he believes that culture is the thing that kind of allows excellence comes from the right culture. And he talks about the New Zealand All Blacks and they've won 84 or 85% of their matches. They're the entire from the inception of their organization 40 years ago, which is an incredible, thing, right? So in terms of just, record of success. And but what Jerry would tell you is that comes from their culture, right? They're able to kind of get that out of themselves because of their culture. And so, I in the right scenarios, I will drop some of that. I will put that in their hands. I will. I've given the Way of the Peaceful Warrior out more than times than I can tell you. I just think it's an incredible book. Dan Millman's book.
Is
If
that
you
the
haven't read
one
that, it's
where
incredible.
it's Socrates is the gas station attendant and it's about a gymnast? Yes. I stumbled on that book just randomly at a bookstore. I started reading it to my wife and that I couldn't put it down. I read half the book at a coffee shop, and I'm like, it's kind of like I don't know. It's just there's something to that book. Yeah, interesting. Okay. Do you have
Yeah,
any
well,
other ones?
well, I think it does a really good job of describing kind of mastery and kind of the things that we have to master. And the truth, one of the things that we hear in Eastern philosophy is that if you master one path, indeed you will master all paths, because the things that you have to master in yourself to be a master of any path are going to be transferable to other paths. And so I think there's some truth in that. That's why mastery is such a cool thing to pursue, right? Um, there's also kind of a book called Every Shot Counts, I think is probably what it's called, or Every Shot Matters. I think it's Annika Sorensen wrote a book about training and kind of all the things that she kind of did in her run up to becoming number one in the world. And I thought that was just a great book, and because it speaks very in the book. I mean, they go right into it. It's like there's two things you have to manage here: your attention and your intention. Right. So, what's your intention, and where's your attention? And
Beautiful.
so, and the book is built incredibly about just they just go over and over and over that concept over and over and over, and just in terms of there's little games you play, but it's built around um, um, those two basic ideas. And so, those are probably the three that I would probably recommend to.
Awesome. I've read one of them, which you've just given me now a book club. Job is to read the other two. So
Yeah.
I'm curious. So we got the ears and eyes of golf parents all over the world. What question haven't we asked that we should be asking, or what should we be talking about right now that we haven't yet?
I think the looking at kind of the youth golf, kind of the developmental things that are happening in the game. There's things that I think we're doing quite well. The thing I think we have to be very, very careful of is fast tracking, trying to move people, trying to move kids too fast down that track. The early specialization we know is disruptive. Um, Trying to be an 8-year-old world champion is probably not a good idea. So I would, I think that probably some more education relative to, you know, from a sports science perspective, golf is a late specialization sport, which means we really shouldn't try to really even focus on trying to play much, high level competition until after puberty. Just, I mean, okay, so because if it's a late specialization sport, it's until you get past puberty that you can even start talking about getting the machine built. I think there's a lot of emphasis on prepubescent kids that's probably harmful. And I think it's us attaching too much value to winning and too much value um, to results, before puberty, because puberty has ruined a lot of good golfers. I mean, it's really a tough thing for a kid to go through. Not only physically, just the physical changes, but if you've got a young kid that's had great success as a prepubescent athlete, and then they've won every tournament they've ever played in, and so they played 200 tournaments by the time they're 12. And all of a sudden they grow, and now all of a sudden on the backside of this, they kind of lose their way for a while. Unless you're pretty well armed to be able to kind of steer somebody through that and help the parents and them understand it, the panic button goes off, and everybody, we lose a lot of kids right in that transition. The other thing that I would say just about junior golf in general that where we miss it is in this country. We'll say this guy say this country. This is in the United States and probably maybe not so much Canada, but for the U.S. for sure. Um, we do junior golf through 18, and then after they're 18, they're kind of out on their own. But if you follow the Olympic kind of modeling relative to youth sport, you could be a junior Olympian through your 23rd year. There's 23 and under your junior Olympics. So according to sports scientists, the full physical maturity in terms of, let's talk about muscular, kind of skeletal, hormonal, brain, all of it kind of getting developed, doesn't really fully happen until your 23rd year. So this time between 18 and 23 is hypercritical. And unfortunately, we just throw, once you through a junior golf, we just kind of farm you off to whether it's college golf or whatever it is, and all that great development that's been done up, through 18 and under, that for somebody to become a world class player, they have to be able to continue on that pathway. So with development, with proper type of support. So I think for me, I mean, I think, looking at kind of what's happening U12 kind of is a little bit frightening. And then this void that happens, in the U.S. college golf system doesn't help it. Unfortunately, I think it's based on, I know that it creates opportunity to play, and I know it's, there's but it's based on talent ID, and it's based on competition. It's not really a developmental pathway. There's a few really incredibly good developmental coaches in college. I will say that, but as a large let's call it just let's its own entity. It's not great for development, and so I think that need to kind of try to figure out how we can do a better job with the U12s and how we can and their parents and their the entire ecosystem, and also this ecosystem from 18 to 23. See if we can do a better job with that.
I mean, the last piece of advice that or thing that you're highlighting, I think actually takes a lot of pressure off of parents and kids to be like, listen, it doesn't matter if your kid is the best 8-year-old in the world or 12-year-old. Like, what does matter? And I remember you said this before too, and it stuck with me. What matters when you want to peak is at like 21, 23. You want to be the best 24-year-old in the world. Like that's what
Yeah,
actually
for
matters.
sure.
And the idea that, as parents that, especially in the junior golf kind of circuit, there's so much pressure to play so many tournaments and drive out of state and all the money and all of this. Whereas if you can kind of take a step back and be like, no, 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 let little, Johnny or Jill just be as much of an athlete, have as much joy in understanding competition and all the rest of this in multiple sports, and then allow them, hopefully, if that's their path, and if not, but to find with their own intention, to find golf after they hit puberty, and then go hyper intention, and work back on what they need to do then to go to the next level. But those
Yeah.
years before, I mean, as parents, we always feel like we're behind, right? We're always comparison trap, always behind. So I think that's very liberating, and I think that parents should really
Yeah,
heed that
and
advice.
I would agree with you. I think if you look out on the tour around the world now, if the kids that have made it to the world stage, you see these kids that look hyper athletic, and they played. If you talk to all of them, a lot of them played multiple sports. So the idea of allowing kids, those prepubescent kids to really build a high, to the big, huge physical literacy bank and do a lot of different things, um, develop the neural speed, the kind of the physicality, the agility, all the ability to kind of move. I think those things are really, really important. I mean, a lot of the players that are world class players now didn't really kind of focus off into golf until they were 13, 14, 15 years old. And so, but they came from other sporting backgrounds, and golf was always part of what they were doing, but not the only thing they were doing. So,
No, wonderful. For those parents, or players or anybody that want to kind of keep up to date with what you're doing, what you're choosing in the next chapters in your own career, what's the best way for people to find you and to potentially get that book, the Kevin Kirk Keys to Mastery, that I'm forcing you to write, even though you didn't agree to that, but I think we're agreeing on air right now. What's the best way for people to find you?
I'll tell you what, Ryan, we'll co-write that book. How about?
Ooh, done, done, absolutely done. But yeah, how do
As
people
far as
find you?
follow, as far as following me, I'm like I said, I'm on the move, and I'll be keeping people pretty abreast of kind of what I'm doing. Probably Instagram. It's probably Kevin Kirk Golf is. I'll be posting some stuff there, kind of starting pretty soon, and also kind of through my LinkedIn account. Those are probably two of the best ways to find me. So,
Kevin, thank you so much for coming on again to the Golf Parent podcast. It's always a joy. It's you're a special teacher and a special human. So thank you for sharing your wisdom and your time.
all right, well, I'm going to call you, and we'll get started on that book, Ryan. I appreciate you having me on. And just while I've got you on here, I want to thank you for all the work that you're doing in the space to create awareness, for the parents and all the people in the ecosystem. And you're doing a phenomenal job. And I just want to let you know that it doesn't go unnoticed by me and others. And just want to thank you for letting me be on your program.
Appreciate that kindness and that positivity. Thanks so much for sharing. And thanks again. Thanks for tuning in. As a fellow golf parent, I know how much this journey matters. If this podcast helped you even 1%, please consider following and reviewing it. It's the #1 way to grow the community and keep bringing you elite insights week after week. And while you're here, check out the show description for exclusive discounts from our sponsors, handpicked to help your junior golfer train smarter and play better.